Hey Nick, look at me. I'm torn apart. There are artificial satellites hanging in orbit of this planet. Nero, the navigator, rolled back in his chair a little and showed the first pilot on the Formo visor screen. What kind of artificial satellites? If modulated signals came from this planet, it does not mean that there is a civilization on the planet. Most likely, the signals just bounced off the planet and reached our radars on Ghana. Maybe the technicians in Ghana had eaten dried mushrooms from Protea again and dreamed something. You know yourself that no one believes in civilization on this planetary system. Nick, I know that we were sent here simply to refute the hypothesis of an intelligent civilization in this system, but the Formo visor clearly shows that a pile of metal in an elliptical orbit is a satellite, and of an unusual appearance. There are no such non-artificial objects in our database. Yes, look for yourself. There can be no such objects. Nick treated Nero very well. Nero was a young but excellent navigator. He did his job perfectly and was not prone to fantasy. I just didn't know why he criticized Nero's words. He just categorically didn't want civilization to be discovered here. Then they will have to spend many stellar cycles in the orbit of this planet. And Nick had a brood just before he left Ghana, and Nick was now thinking more about the kids than about the case. But he was an experienced military pilot, and deep down he was already sure that there was a civilization after all, that the satellites in orbit were artificial, and that he would have to stay here for a while, conducting preliminary reconnaissance. But then a large reconnaissance cruiser will arrive. They will hand over the object of research to him and they will be sent home. Maybe they will also be rewarded, because according to the charter of the fleet, scouts who are the first to meet with an unknown civilization are entitled to rewards. Although I haven't heard of anyone being rewarded for this in a long time. The objects are really artificial. The thermal visor shows an illogical distribution of thermograms over the volume of this object. Moreover, there are several zones with elevated temperatures, and they are located in different parts of the facility. This was voiced by Neela, the co-pilot, who had been sitting silently and fiddling with the instruments all this time. I understand, Neil. Well, you've convinced me. Listen to my command. The co-pilot begins to approach the planet. The radius of the orbit is within the range of reconnaissance probes. Navigator, start mapping this star system, the presence of planets and planetoids. You are making a complete research map of the central star, looking for planets with atmospheres. Then you start exploring the surface of this planet and make a complete map of the area. Well, I'll try to do artificial satellites. Maybe they're just the remnants of some old civilization that no longer exists. All right, let's get to work. We don't have much time. There are only a few cycles left before the communication session, and we need to have time to dig up at least some information so that we can make a preliminary report. With these words, Nick turned to his monitor, making it clear that it was enough to chat. It was time to work. But he himself understood that such a tone was not needed. No one in the crew suffered from laziness. Everyone gave their best. But the authority of the commander must be maintained. It was an axiom at all times. Moreover, I was already beginning to feel in my gut that not everything is as quiet in this minor planetary system as it seemed at first glance. He felt the same way back on Tireia, when the quiet planet turned into a furious beast that resisted the landing of the Ghanaian troops and had to be subdued by the entire Third Space Fleet. And although long-range scouts do not participate in such battles, not their profile, it is still not pleasant. After such events, no one usually remembers any scouts. Especially, no one awards them or pays an additional bonus. So, quiet exploration is just a paradise for a scout. Nice entered all the initial data, redirected the right spectroscope to an object that his subordinates considered artificial, and introduced additional parameters for the study, and he waited for the system to receive and process data about this object. Time began to drag on painfully long. His colleagues were snuffling nearby, doing their part of the program. The processor was beeping slowly, processing a huge amount of incoming information. And finally, the lull receded, and reports began to arrive from the team little by little. The map of the star system has been compiled. The planets are described and listed in the registry. There are 1 million space units to the planet under study. Braking is 10% per cycle. A schematic map of the planet under study has been compiled. I'm starting to process the information. There are 500,000 units to the planet. Braking is 50% per cycle. Information processing is completed. Full braking. Calculation of the orbit trajectory. The calculation is finished. The co-pilot should put maximum protection on the armor. Absorption of any radiation is 100%. Then, someone got into work and began to give the necessary orders. Report on the slightest change in the force field around the ship. The navigator should set up a minefield and magnetic traps around the ship and put the anti-ship system on full alert. Transfer all the intelligence to my terminal. Neck unfolded the three-dimensional image transmitted to him and began to peer into it, looking for priority targets for analysis. So, what are we doing here? Neck pointed at the image of the planetoid next to the planet. Oh, so we have a full-fledged satellite. Interesting. So, there is a fairly dense atmosphere. Let's see what its composition is. Both Nero and Neela looked back at Nika's shout. Did you see? What? The voices of the co-pilot and navigator merged into a single whole. The atmosphere of the planet is 97% similar to the atmosphere of Ghana. Neck's voice became shrill and agitated. That is, yes? That's her? There was silence in the ship. Neela was the first to break the silence. What are we going to do, Commander? I don't know, Neck replied in an uncertain voice. There are no instructions for such in the Navy, for such an occasion. But maybe it's not the planet of the fathers after all. Nero has always been very optimistic. I don't know. There are too many coincidences. A small star system, a planet has a satellite and an identical atmosphere. The star of the system also fits the described parameters. He didn't look depressed anymore, but he hadn't fully recovered yet. Can we wait for the cruiser and give him the planet to explore? No. Neck had already completely mastered himself and began to calculate the possible options. You know, Nero, that the technology of the fathers was very high, and it is unknown what will happen when a large reconnaissance cruiser breaks into the system. It is unlikely that our ancestors invented anything to protect their planet from encroachments from outer space. We have not yet comprehended even 100th part of their knowledge, so we cannot even imagine the consequences of the arrival of a large ship into the system. But it can. Listen to my order. Neck's voice found its confident notes. Inform the commander of the Third Fleet and the reception of the Security Council about the discovery. And that's it. The communication equipment is on reception. The extra energy consumers on board are turned off, and we are waiting for instructions. Neck leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes. This can't be happening. It just can't. Take this and find the planet of the fathers from which they escaped during the disaster. What discoveries are waiting for us on the planet? What technologies can be revealed to us? Or the planet is simply mined and will turn to dust as soon as someone else sets foot on it. But we are the descendants of our fathers. We have their genes. In theory, we should not provoke any response. What if? He jerked sharply and moved closer to the terminal, began to enter some data. Nero glanced at the first pilot, then looked over his shoulder at his monitor and froze. Neck entered data to search for biomass and assigned the initial search data. The structure of cells and your blood test. Do you really think that the planet is not empty? Nero's voice betrayed great excitement. Do you think that not all fathers have left the planet? Neck silently continued to enter the data. Nero turned around and looked at Neo. She gave him a puzzled look and shrugged her shoulders. Finally, Neck finished entering the data, hit the confirm search button, and leaned back in the seat with an exhale. Long waiting cycles dragged on again. It seemed like an eternity before the inscription "Search is over" appeared on the monitor of the first pilot. Data processing. Nero stood up and moved behind the commander so as not to miss a word of the report. Neela followed his example. The coincidence with the cellular analysis is 5 billion units with an error of 97%, 500,000 units with an error of 95%. The discrepancy with the cellular analysis is 18 billion units. The total mass of the biological mass is... But I was no longer listening to the processor's report data. More than 5 billion individuals. Are there really so many descendants of fathers living on this planet? It's just incredible. How will they react if we invade their world? What could such an invasion threaten us with? At what technological level is this civilization? If they own all the technology of the fathers that we lost as a result of the Star War, then we have no chance in the war against them. Commander, a message has arrived from the Security Council reception, Nero said, looking at the first pilot, who was sitting in a chair with his eyes closed. Read it! The first pilot did not open his eyes. Stay in orbit. Wait for the small commander's flagship. A negotiator will arrive. The negotiation master is Zolo. Do not take any action. The Neck chose the very essence of the message, not perceiving the clerical vocabulary delights that staff rats apparently sinned at all times. Then the first pilot stood up and suddenly offered, "Let's play a game of Jimbo. How much longer do we have to sit here?" But the commander, I don't care. The negotiator will arrive no earlier than in 20 cycles. Anyway, we can't do anything on our own right now, so at least we'll get some rest. Nero exchanged glances with the co-pilot. He had never seen the first pilot of the Neck violate the regulations of the Navy so rudely. The small command cruiser Cena is calling the Crimson Star. A deciphered voice came from the terminal to the players. Neck, flushed from playing Jimbo, went to his terminal and answered, "This is the Crimson Star. The first pilot is in touch. A clear path for you, Commander Neck. My name is Zolo. I'm a negotiator. A clear path for you, too, Master Zolo. We are waiting for you. Now we will turn off the ship's power protection. Give you a diagram of the minefields and the docking program. Thank you, Captain. But why are you so sure that this is the planet of the fathers?" The intonation of the negotiator's voice was clearly condescending. "A premonition, Master Zolo. But according to the regulations of the Navy, a premonition is not a proven fact. I know the rules of the Navy well, you can be sure. The conversation with the negotiator has long been terribly annoying to the first pilot, but he was not stupid and did not show a sign. Then on the basis of what data did you conclude that you had discovered the planet of the fathers? Premonitions alone are not enough for this. Zolo was clearly leading the conversation to the fact that the crew of the Crimson Star long-range scout made a mistake by wishful thinking. What for? The processor has analyzed that this planet is the planet of the fathers with an 80% probability, taking into account all the data and coincidences. Neck used his last and main argument. Zolo made a small but pleasant mistake by not reading the situation analysis first. Or does he have some other trump card that nobody knew? Are you, Captain, probably hinting to me that you know the code of the negotiator, which states that the negotiator is obliged to start working if the coincidence is more than 70%? Zolo conducted the conversation confidently, despite the fact that he actually should have already lost this verbal duel. You are a good negotiator, Master Zolo. You don't lose the thread of conversation in any situation. The first pilot smiled, although in his heart he no longer liked this self-confident, pompous character. Or maybe he just has a job like that? Thanks for the assessment, Captain. Okay, we digress. In 2 cycles, I plan to descend to the planet and conduct reconnaissance. In case intelligent individuals are found, I will make an attempt to enter into negotiations. Come on, come down. The descendants of their fathers are still sitting and waiting for the good negotiation Master Zolo to fly to them and begin to exhort them to join the Empire. Of course. No one said this out loud, but no one has forbidden thinking in the Empire yet. Well, we will see from afar how things are going with our distant relatives, who have the same fathers with us. Neck sat and tried to figure out what kind of feelings he was experiencing now, when he saw that the negotiator's ship had undocked and was slowly starting a descent maneuver. On the one hand, he was terribly jealous of Zolo, that he would be the first to set foot on the planet of the Fathers and enter into negotiations with them. On the other hand, having considerable combat experience, he was sure that the negotiator was trying to speed up events without studying the planet better. After all, they have not received any images or any other data about those who now inhabit this planet. If these are the descendants of the Fathers, there may be some problems. If someone settled on the planet after her fathers abandoned her, these are other problems. After all, Zolo is not stupid at all. He really was reputed to be the best negotiator of the fleet. I've never seen him before, but I've heard a lot about him. But the fact that Zolo turned out to be a narcissistic, overconfident person, this certainly surprised the first pilot. But I have already decided for myself that everything should go as it goes. He followed all the instructions required in this case. They hang in orbit far enough from the planet. In case of an unexpected impact, they can quickly maneuver. So, the first pilot did not feel any particular anxiety, and therefore sat quietly in his chair and waved his leg. For the effect of complete calmness, he could also whistle something, but he had been flying with this crew for a long time, and there was no need to play to the public once again. Neck, what if the descendants of the Fathers are very different from us? Neela wasn't particularly talkative, but there were so many emotions on her face and on Nero's that she couldn't resist. For example, the skin color is not the same as ours, but for example, yellow or black. Or is the metabolism different? I don't know, Neela. Don't rush things. Our brave negotiator will return, and we'll see there. Zolo never made many conclusions ahead of time without having a lot of information. He started negotiations only when he had received most of the information and had already drawn preliminary conclusions. But in this case, he was in no hurry to draw conclusions. Well, yes, the planet is similar in description to the planet of the Fathers, but it is similar, no more. So far, it's just a coincidence. He never based his analysis on premonitions, as the first pilot of a long-range reconnaissance aircraft. Only facts. Nothing but facts. That was the principle of gold. So far, he hasn't let him down. For landing, Zolo chose the southern part of the planet, which is very densely covered with plant biomass and has a relatively small cluster of individuals, whom Captain Neck too soon dubbed descendants of the Fathers. It is unwise to land in an open area and among a large number of unknown individuals, although the negotiator was very seriously equipped in case of a sudden attack. Energy protection from any wave weapon first, class fire biosecurity, powerful, built-in spacesuit, medical complex, and much more. All this was supposed to protect against sudden danger. The ship rocked gently. The anti-grav leveled him in the plane and gently lowered him to the ground. Zolo chose the landing place that seemed to him the most convenient. It was almost a flat area in the middle of a dense forest, and a huge river flowed nearby, the sight of which simply fascinated Zolo. There were no such rivers in Ghana, the homeland of the Zolo. Zolo was also somewhat confused by the sight of this clearing, which seemed to be artificial. The plants had apparently been cut down on it 5 or 6 cycles ago, and now the clearing was covered with a shroud of young growth, which was no higher than 1 dan in height. It seems that I chose a landing site far from the places of accumulation of unknown individuals of civilization, Zolo thought to himself, and there are traces of vital activity here. The scanner did not show the presence of any equipment or devices in the area of 1,000 leagues away. Well, the riddles began. And maybe the first pilot is right. This is the homeland of the fathers, and they left a lot of traps here. After all, my round ship fit in this round clearing almost right next to it. Okay, there's nothing to panic about. It's not the first time we've come out of such situations. The negotiator took a last look at the instruments and made sure that there was no danger around the ship for many leagues. There is a lot of biomass, but most likely these are unreasonable individuals, since there are no devices nearby at all, and we are not afraid of the unreasonable ones. Zolo checked the safety on the laser light machine gun once again, got up, and went to the decompression compartment. Having descended to the ground on the lift, Zolo stepped and almost sank knee-deep into the vegetation. The plants were such that the negotiator did not cease to be surprised, turning his head around. Finally, the suit's analyzer clicked dryly twice, making it clear that the environmental analysis was over. Zolo raised his left hand and looked at the analyzer monitor. Wow! The atmosphere is absolutely completely safe. This can't be happening. There is, of course, a difference with the atmosphere of Ghana, but mostly it concerns neutral gases. Zolo shook his head in mild perplexity. Take off the helmet. The statute strictly prohibits this. On the other hand, there is a small article in the charter of the negotiator that allows you to do everything that is necessary to continue research. That is, it indirectly allows you to do everything that the charter prohibits. I don't care about anything. I'm taking it off. Zolo typed the necessary command on the monitor, then clicked off the mechanical locks and took off his helmet. He closed his eyes for a moment, but the spicy fresh air of the tropical forest rushed into his lungs, and Zolo slowly opened his eyes. The medical analyzer was silent, showing that all body parameters were normal. The negotiator took off his armored glove and looked at his hand. The skin had the same dark, greenish hue as always. Then the motion sensor beeped loudly, and Zolo turned around, and I saw that it was rushing at him at high speed parallel to the ground, a thick tree trunk. There was no time to bounce back. Zoe, the leader of the cannibal tribe that lived in South America near the Amazon, silently stared at the body lying in front of him. There was no such prisoner in the tribe yet. When the hunters of the tribe were examining the traps left recently, they came across a huge round mountain of iron that stood near a trap set for a large animal. But contrary to expectations, it was not a large beast, but an outsider wrapped in some strange colored clothes. But most of all, Zoe was struck by the alien's skin. It was dark green in color. Zoe stood over the stranger for a long time before making a choice. The tribe has not eaten properly for a long time. The big animals have gone somewhere. The strangers have stopped falling into the trap's set. Even now, 50 hungry eyes were staring at him. And Zoe made up his mind. He raised his tattooed hand, in which he held a small spear, and pointed at the sacrificial stone. The tribe instantly jumped to its feet, and a deafening shout of joy rang out through the jungle. The medical unit suddenly came to its senses from such a terrible blow and began to analyze the condition of the negotiator. In the very first seconds, he revealed that Zolo was unconscious and injected him with a stimulant. Zolo groaned softly and opened his eyes. The last thing he saw was that he was lying on some kind of stone, and a creature similar to him, but with some strange yellow skin color, was holding a sharp stick over his head. An alarmingly green light flashed on Nake's monitor. The first pilot opened the received alarm message and rolled his eyes. The small commander's flagship was transmitting from the planet that the negotiator was gold, is dead. He began to frantically push buttons, but could not connect remotely to the flagship. Before exiting the ship, Zolo programmatically forbade remote control of the ship. "I told you so." That's all the first pilot had time to think before he automatically pushed the general alarm button. After a couple of cycles, the Crimson Star accepted the order of the Security Council. Go down to the planet and find out the circumstances of the death of the negotiator. In case of a threat, immediately fly off the planet and wait for further instructions in a distant stationary orbit. I see a small flagship. There is no external damage. The flagship's processor shows that there are no malfunctions. A deviation from the norm is only the death of the pilot. Neela's voice was absolutely calm. "Here comes the girl." Any veteran would envy her nerves, he thought enviously. Listen to the order. To land the star as close as possible to the flagship. After landing, cover the ships with a protective induction field. Then, using the emergency beacon, determine the bearing and range to the negotiator's spacesuit. Then we disembark. I'm in front, the navigator's covering. The co-pilot remains on the ship and provides gun cover and communications. When a moving target appears, fire to kill. Let's get started. I've even kind of missed such situations. But still, I would probably prefer to stay at home. When he was less than a league from the suit's beacon, he stopped and listened. The silence of the forest was broken only by some very distant sounds, although the sensors showed the movement of a large number of biomass units nearby. Nobody began to look at the strange forest and moved directly to the spacesuit. Soon, he and Nero came to a clearing where about a dozen different structures made of organic material, trees, branches, were built. Near the largest structure, someone noticed a spacesuit and moved towards it. The sensors still showed no danger. Even before reaching the spacesuit, Neck realized that there was no body in it. He looked around in confusion and was stunned. A little to the side, near the smallest building, a huge stone lay on the ground. Its surface and sides were covered with some kind of brown streaks. On the stone lay, or rather what was left of the negotiator, Zolo. He fought a lot, saw all sorts of things, but to have someone cut into large pieces, nausea instantly rose in my throat. He came to his senses because someone was poking him in the back from behind. Neck turned around. Nero, with his helmet off, holding his mouth with his hands, was pointing somewhere. Neck looked where Nero was pointing, and another bout of nausea came to his throat. 40 or 50 people were lying side by side where the distraught Nero was pointing. They looked like her and Nero, but their skin was some kind of dirty yellow shade. But there was no doubt about what they were doing before they died. They were all eating what was left of Negotiator Zolo, and, apparently, the difference in metabolism played tricks on them. They were all dead. They were poisoned. Why did Neek think absolutely calmly and grabbed the completely distraught Nero by the sleeve of his spacesuit? He turned me around and yelled, "Let's get out of here!" It was only in orbit that Neck completely regained control of himself and began to prepare a report for the Security Council. At the same time, the navigator was working on his monitor, manually typing resignation letters for their entire small crew.